How we doing? How we doing? This is Destination Denver, Colorado, and I've got a great one for you today. I'm giving you the top reasons to live in Aurora, Colorado. Let's do it. This is Destination Denver, Colorado. I am your host, Jimmy Everett, and listen, if you're interested in learning all the ins and outs, pros and cons to moving to or around Denver, Colorado, then this is the channel for you. So that subscribe button, as well as the notification icon down below, make sure you're clicking that as I'm dropping new videos for you each and every week. And listen, as much as I love getting a little creative here on camera, I'm also a licensed loan officer covering the entire state of Colorado, teamed up with some of the state's best realtors, and I'm here to be a resource for you in any way, shape, or form I can. So the number and email popping up below, I'm always the person answering your phone calls, answering your texts, answering your emails. Hell, send a carrier pigeon to me, doesn't matter, there when you need me. Now that we've got all that fun-filled stuff out of the way, let's get to what we're here for, and that is the top reasons to live in Aurora, Colorado. All right, so as we get into our conversation about Aurora, let's just talk about some basics. Aurora happens to be the third largest city in the state of Colorado, but let's be clear, Colorado is not one of those states where you see a lot of major large cities. Denver has a population a little over 750,000. That is far and away the largest city we have. The second largest is Colorado Springs, which is about an hour and a half to our south. So after Aurora, at its 380,000 people, most cities and towns you're going to see in Denver are all 250,000 people or less. Now, geographically speaking, Aurora is not just the third largest city, it is a massive city. Its size is nearly as big, if not bigger, than Denver itself. It stretches north of Denver all the way up to I-70 and continues to stretch south all the way until it's touching Centennial. So when we're talking about Aurora, a lot of times you're talking about different regions. It's not as though living in Aurora is just kind of covering it all. If you're living from North Aurora to South Aurora, from West Aurora to East Aurora, you're going to see a lot of differences in those communities, and I want to make sure we have a conversation about all of that. So the number one reason that people tend to move or live in Aurora is for its affordability. So from a national average standpoint, you're going to find that most Denver cities and suburbs are higher than the national average. But as far as the Denver metro area goes, Aurora is lower than the average for Denver metro. It's more affordable, and it's more affordable in the key factors: groceries, healthcare, housing. That includes home prices on average, as well as rents on average. Now, Aurora, what you'll find, has a pretty good mix. About 60% of the properties in Aurora are owner occupied. About 40% of them, obviously, a little less than 40% being renters. So you've got a nice mix there. Now, to give you kind of an idea as far as these home prices go, a home in Denver right now, median price might be around $720,000. In Aurora, as I speak, somewhere around $580,000. Now, I have to admit, I hate the term median price. And if you're thinking about homes, you're gonna see that number a lot. Keep in mind, the median price is not the average. The median is simply the middle number in a long stack of numbers. It can be somewhat accurate, but it can also be somewhat misleading. For the sake of home real estate stats, I'm giving it to you for that purpose, but don't take it too literally. Now, to add a little more depth to that and to further explain the affordability of Aurora in comparison to Denver, when we talk about condominiums, the median home price, again, that favorite word, median home price for condos in Denver was close to $580,000. It was $310,000 for Aurora. So again, you're talking about that middle number. That means there were condos sold above that and condos sold above that, or below that, excuse me. But right in the middle was $310,000 compared to $580,000 if you're looking in Denver. Now, the number two reason to live in Aurora, Colorado, as we get into some more fun stuff, is the developments that have taken place in Aurora. Now, when you look at Colorado and you spend some time in Denver, you're going to realize very quickly that I-25, our major highway that goes from north to south or south to north, depending on which way you're driving, and no, Isaac, my videographer, I'm not getting ready to talk about traffic. But I-25 doesn't just transport people north and south, it also literally splits our city geographically from west to east. And what you'll find is that when you get west of I-25, there is only so much geographic space before you run into the Rocky Mountains. So a lot of the communities west of I-25, Lakewood, Wheat Ridge, Littleton, Golden, they were developed decades ago, and those areas have filled up the majority of their space. What does that mean? It means most of the communities in Lakewood and Littleton and Golden have been established for 40, 50, 60 years. There aren't new neighborhoods, there aren't new developments. Those neighborhoods are not exactly modern. Now, when you go to the east side of town, and this is very specific and very important to Aurora, there is a lot of space. Once you get east of Denver, it just becomes a high plains, and Denver for that matter is just a high plains desert. It's just flat as you go east. So there is room to build and develop. And Aurora has definitely been rewarded for that space. I talked to you earlier about how big the city itself is. Well, within that, you see a lot of developments. And one of the big aspects of developments in these communities is what we call planned development. So referring back to the west side of town, Lakewood, where I am now, Littleton, in those communities, you see a lot of suburbs, you see some parks here and there, you see your schools, but nothing was really planned as far as convenience, which is obviously a huge factor for people today. We want to be able to go to a central location a lot of times for our rec center and our workouts, our grocery stores, our postal office, all of those things, right? You don't see that a ton on the west side of town, but that was thought out in Aurora. So as you see these planned developments, you see communities in which people can really spend time in their community where they have their shops, their cafes, they have rec centers, they have pools, they have different community centers that people can hang out in, and you have several developments like that in Aurora. That is common on the east side of I-25. You're just not going to see it very often on the west side. And as we talk about those developed areas and those communities, we're going to talk about point number 3, and that is there are biking and hiking and walking trails galore. So one of the things that I really miss about the Midwest, I lived there for a few years, was the fact that in all these different communities I went to, I would always see these walking trails between the different neighborhoods. They were all over the place. My buddy Kyle used to take me for runs, and I always thought, how cool would this be if we had it out in Denver? But where I grew up here in Lakewood, very rarely do you see it. Aurora has fixed a lot of those challenges. So when you drive through Aurora and you drive into some of these communities, which I'm going to talk about if you stick around, you're going to see trails all over the place. You're going to see different trails that will lead you all across Aurora to different communities. It'll lead you all the way into Denver. It'll lead you into neighborhoods like Cherry Creek. They really thought through that as they developed it. They made those communities as walkable as possible. And because Denver, we'll talk about a lot, and Aurora has great weather, 300 days of sunshine, you'll hear that in every video. There's all of these opportunities to get out on these trails and enjoy it. Listen, I can feel it. You're into this video and you're thinking, man, I really should live in Aurora, Colorado. So now is the time to hit me up. That number and email popping up below. Calls, texts, emails, days, nights, weekends, whatever works for you works for me. So as you're walking around, we'll go to point number 4, and that is there are a lot of things to do in Aurora. Now again, I have to preface, Aurora is huge. So when I say things to do, it doesn't mean that there are things to do within 5 minutes of you wherever you are. Certain things you're gonna have to drive from one side of Aurora to, unless you're in the middle of Aurora, whatever. But let's talk about some of them. So first is the Gaylord Resort, which is out somewhat close in the direction of Denver International Airport. It's basically northeast Aurora. Get my directions in my head. So the Gaylord, and there are Gaylords in different states, is a massive resort, a huge hotel with convention centers, event centers, all sorts of things. And throughout the year, they'll have different events. They'll have theaters, they'll have Christmas activities. I mentioned the conventions, very big out there. And there are a lot of different hotels around the Gaylord all having these different activities. And I can't say you heard it here first, because if you do any type of research, you'll probably know this. but there is talk, there's rumor here in Denver that eventually the Denver Broncos Stadium, which is currently basically centrally located in Denver, there's rumor that eventually there will be a development out in that area, out towards the Gaylord for that stadium. So that is an area that has seen explosive growth already, may include more in the future. Next up is the Stanley Market. So Stanley Market was kind of the first of these open markets that you'll see throughout Denver now. It is this open space filled with different restaurants and food trucks, cafes, shopping, different areas for events, and it's on a huge community lot. So they'll have, again, different outdoor conventions. They have one called Top Taco. Write this down wherever you are, because that Stanley Market every year, late August, early September, they set up about 40 to 50 different taco stands all over the place. You just go taco crazy. And what is best with tacos? Well, clearly cervezas and tequila, and there is a lot of tequila. So Stanley Market, Top Taco, write all that down. And also while you're at it, download the Uber or Lyft app, because you are going to need it if you go to Top Taco, without a doubt. Now, I talk a lot about the fact that Denver has beautiful weather, and the first two activities I gave you on Aurora happen to be indoor, so let's get back outside. There's two water venues that are pretty rare. Denver doesn't have a lot of water, obviously. So Aurora has a couple of them. One, Cherry Creek Reservoir. If you're into water skiing, if you're into wakeboarding, you're into motorboating, you motorboat an SOB, then Cherry Creek Reservoir is going to be one of your top picks for that. Now, let's say that you're more into wakeboarding, you're more into swimming, you're more into laying on a beach and chilling out, you need to check out Aurora Reservoir, which is kind of southeast Aurora. Aurora Reservoir has quickly become one of my favorite places. They've built some communities around it, which I'm going to cover, but it has hundreds of acres of open land, and it does not allow motors on its water. Now, you can take a sailboat out, and your sailboat can have a trolling motor, but you can't bring out some big gas-guzzling motorboat to go water skiing. Not happening in Aurora. So Aurora Reservoir is definitely one of those great places to check out. And Aurora in general has over 100 parks. It has over 5,000 acres of open land, probably more than that, but that's just what they consider park centric. But I mean, it's huge geographically. Again, I just like saying geographically. So it's huge. There's a lot of area to explore. Last thing I'm gonna add just for my sake is Southlands Mall. So Southlands Mall was built several years back. A lot of communities built around it, and it is kind of in that tucked in southeast corner of Aurora. It's about as far away Aurora-wise as you can get from downtown Denver. Takes a bit of a drive. I love talking about traffic, as my video editor Isaac knows. So be prepared for that. But Southlands Mall is your quintessential outdoor walking mall. It's got all your shops, your cafes, your restaurants, ends into a movie theater. Really a great place to hang out. You can spend a day there, you can sightsee, you can drop people off for hours, just kind of leave them there and then come back and pick them up because they had stuff to do. It's brilliant. And it's a long ways away from where I live. So if I drop them off there, it gives me even more time because I got to drive, all that fun stuff. During the winter, they like to set up an ice rink. That's always one of my favorite things. Although I follow a lot of ice skating, not as gifted as I used to be. That's a lie, I was never gifted. And during the summertime, again, it's just a great excuse to get outside and get some steps. All right, now the number 5 reason to live in Aurora, Colorado, and I touched on it, but now I want to get specific, is the neighborhoods, these great communities that they have built. So let's start with South Shore. So South Shore, a newer community down near that Southlands Mall, a lot of new builds, a great community, tons of walkability, and one of my favorite things about South Shore is how close it is to the Aurora Reservoir. So you're gonna see that in some of these communities, that it backs up damn near right up to that reservoir. And people in these neighborhoods can actually walk to Aurora Reservoir faster than most of us can drive to it, just because of the fact that the road leading to the reservoir itself kind of wraps around it. Takes about 15 minutes from the neighborhood you're seeing right now. It's about a 15-minute drive to the reservoir, whereas if you're walking to it, it takes about 5 minutes. The next neighborhood I would talk to you about that I like a lot is Aurora Hills. Got to check out this drone footage. So Aurora Hills is one of the safest neighborhoods statistically if you go to niche.com in Aurora. And this community is next to a lot of the nicer amenities like Highland Park and the Aurora Hills Golf Course, which is one of the more, one of the better golf courses in the area, at least according to my Tiger Wood loving golfing fans. Aurora neighborhoods for families. It's close to Overland High School, Prairie Middle School, Utah Park, and Jewel Wetlands Park. Jewel Wetlands Park is a pretty big area, about 500 acres, great outdoor space, something to definitely take a peek at. Saddle Rock is one of the most affluent neighborhood communities in Aurora. It has its own golf course. It's located right in the quarter of the Southlands Shopping Center that I spoke to you about, and definitely one of the more popular regions in Aurora. And last up, I would include Meadow Hills. So Meadow Hills, the nice thing about it is that Meadow Hills is located right next to Cherry Creek Reservoir. It's one of the best neighborhoods in Aurora for easy access to outdoor activities. And because it's close to Cherry Creek Reservoir is actually also close to the Denver Tech Center in downtown Denver. So it's in a region of Aurora where you have the quickest access to get to Denver and to the west side of town. And I'm gonna throw in my 6th reason to live in Aurora, Colorado, the breweries. Now, that's kind of cheating because you could live just about anywhere in Colorado and say breweries. They are literally everywhere. But some of my favorite breweries are in Aurora, so write these down. You've got Launchpad Brewing, as I put a 2 up. You got Launchpad Brewing, you got Dry Dock Brewing, and you have Jade Mountain Brewing. Now, Jade Mountain has one of my favorite raspberry brews. Check it out, and you can make fun of me for saying a raspberry, but only one man dare give me the raspberry. And if you don't know that reference, it's because I'm old and I'm showing it. Now listen, I know you've been listening and I know you're thinking to yourself, man, Aurora sounds pretty fantastic. Obviously I want to live there, but there's got to be some drawbacks. Well, I mean, realistically, probably the one drawback, if you will, about Aurora is obviously you are on the east side of Denver, farthest away from the Rocky Mountains. That could be a big deal to you if you need to have visions of the Rocky Mountains. You're gonna see them, but they're gonna be distant. They're huge, but they're not that huge. Aurora is pretty flat, so there's gonna be certain areas where your house is not going to have the type of view that perhaps homes on the west side of town will offer. However, you're still caught a 45-minute drive from hitting the foothills, from being into the mountains. So it's not the most catastrophic thing. That's really the biggest drawback we talk about from just a lifestyle standpoint. So now that you know that you have 6+ great reasons to live in Aurora, Colorado, and you've got one pretty minor one that you can't see the mountains as well, but all you got to do is drive, or perhaps find a house that does have a decent view from Aurora of the mountains, and that solves everything. So now that you're considering it, make sure to hit me up. The phone number and email popping up below. I'm always the person answering your phone calls, answering your texts, answering those emails, here when you need me. This is Destination Denver, Colorado. These are the top reasons to live in Aurora, Colorado. Until next time, peace.